Ram, we're very excited to be talking to you. You've spent 3 decades in banking, insurance, payments, and now fintech. How have you seen India evolve in the last 3 decades? And what are some of the things that come to your mind when you look at the Indian market as of today?
Thank you, Shraddha. I think the last 3 decades has been quite a journey. If I were to summarize it, I'd say that there's been more change probably that's happened in the last decade than in the previous 3 or 4 decades that's happened. And I think in many areas, India has caught up.
Yeah.
Interestingly, in many areas, actually, we've leapfrogged. Not only caught up, but we are ahead of the curve. And that sort of journey is interesting, and it creates a whole lot of enablement opportunities for the entire ecosystem. Having said all of that, whether you take retail financial services, whether you take banking, whether you take consumer credit, payments, or the enablement of fintech, I think we've just merely scratched the surface. And consequently, I think the next decade is going to be really, really interesting from the perspective of all the young folks who are starting out their career in financial services or fintech or payments. I think it's just a gold rush waiting to be tapped.
Where do you see us having leapfrogged?
Well, in a couple of areas, right? Firstly, I think the whole notion of how do we have inclusive finance, right? And that starts with what is a digital identity of a citizen, and therefore how do either the government to citizen services or institution to citizen, whether it's credit or financial services, etc., etc. I think the paradigm that RBI has put in is super progressive. And I think there's only a dearth of institutions waiting to tap it. So the rails that India has put in place, right, is what I mean by the whole leapfrogging stuff. And now it's as many trains that go on those rails. We need more and more trains to, literally go on the rails. And if you think about the market cap of India and financial services contribution to that, it's like 60%, 65%. And I think the scope for the next 5 or 10 $100 billion companies, and certainly 40 or 50 more unicorns to come in this space.
What are some of the biggest challenges and what are the biggest opportunities that you see in this market?
Firstly, let me lay out the differences between traditional players and new fintechs and the similarities, more interestingly. I think banks are trying to become more like technology companies, and technology companies are trying to become more like banks. And so there is a sort of blurring of identity which is happening. Secondly, I'd say that the whole notion of, if you talk 5 years ago, either in Silicon Valley or in Hong Kong, Singapore, or in India, or UK, every single fintech said, I'm going to destroy a bank. I'm going to make sure that the banks don't exist. They're doing a bad job, etc. But the whole paradigm has shifted now to saying that fintechs have an incredible technology stack and a solution for the customer experience. However, banks do have brand, they have customer legacy, and they have trust. So I think it's no longer David versus Goliath. I think it's about how David and Goliath can learn to dance with each other. So the whole paradigm is one of partnership. Banks are forming incubators, accelerators, thought factories. Fintechs are figuring out how they can participate in this whole thing. Of course, there is a licensing angle to it, but there are ways to sort of put a consumer experience layer on top of the regulatory license in order to create an experience that's meaningful to the consumer.
What has been your leadership philosophy? How have you spent the last 3 decades?
Well, I don't know whether I'm competent to talk about leadership philosophies, but certainly I think there's been some learnings, incredible learnings, more coming from what one did not do well rather than what one did well. But I think at the end of the day, if you boil it down, there are 3 or 4 things, Shraddha. I think the first thing is the realization that when you're working for an organization, even if you're a founder, and I'm certainly not a founder, I'm an employee of this organization, the realization has to come that you are a trustee, right? And what does a trustee do? You're bequeathed the trust, right? You bequeath a business or a franchise or whatever it is. And your main responsibility is to leave the place hopefully a little better than what you picked it up, and for the sort of next set of people who run this place to get a legacy which sort of is meaningful from what we're trying to do and which sort of makes a difference in the businesses and communities that we serve. That's one big aspect that's very, very important to me. And the second thing is what I keep saying. We had a strategy meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I said the same thing to the team. It is that as a leader, your job is not to create followership, right? As a leader, I think your most important job is to create more leaders.
Yeah.
And to create the next generation of leaders. And that sort of resonates very deeply with me.
Yeah, but that comes from a place of security, right? And leaders do become insecure. How have you remained secure over the years?
Well, it's not, I don't think it's so much about security, it's about what you want to do, right? For example, at Visa, we genuinely believe that this is a multi-decadal opportunity, right? And honestly, all of us at Visa, we earn the sort of market cap or the revenues that we have today because of the fabulous work that our predecessors did. It'd be foolish to take the credit for that, right? And therefore, we think very, very firmly that 15% of our job is actually to make the revenues for this year, but 85% of our roles is actually to create an environment for what business looks like 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road. And in platform businesses like Visa, it's uber critical to do that.
There's this whole conversation around security, and you're in a space which is very notorious for the trust that it has or the trust it would not have. And Visa is a very trusted brand. How do you look at security and all those concerns?
I think it's an incredible topic and a very, very deep sort of area where all of us have to be super thoughtful about, right? Especially in India, if you think about digital payments are just 10-15%, right? Even after demonetization and the sort of tailwinds of demonetization. And the Indian consumer is just trying to figure out and take baby steps towards digitization. It just takes one data hack or one sort of leakage to take 2 steps back rather than 1 step forward, right? And therefore, we have a huge responsibility to get that architecture right. Visa invests billions of dollars in making sure we do either it's our own ethical hacking or making sure our firewalls are sort of safe and secure, because we have to do it. It's not whether we get it right most of the time. We have to get it right all of the time, right? And the margin for error is absolutely zero. One of my favorite sayings is, how many babies is it appropriate for a nurse to drop in a hospital? And the right answer is 0. Right? So it's not 1 out of 100 or 1 out of million. So we spend a lot of money, but more importantly, we have a dedicated team, including in Bangalore, where we have a bunch of people, and in the Valley, who sort of work on cybersecurity, on defense. And nowadays, Shraddha, is becoming more of a challenge because it's no longer a couple of teenagers sitting in a garage trying to hack a system. These are very, very sophisticated. They're actually venture-funded fraudsters, and there are actually some nation states who sort of encourage this stuff. So the larger the barricade that comes at us, the thicker and higher the walls we have to erect. And that's core to what we do.
Tell us how you're engaging with the startups. How do you see the startup world? How are you seeing the fintech players, and where do you see it moving forward?
Firstly, I got to say that I'm like a kid in a candy shop. It's super exciting to be in India at this moment in time. The number of startups, I think after the US, I think India has the largest number of fintech startups over the last, you know that statistic very well. And whether it's the number of VCs or PE money which is chasing this space, but more importantly, the sheer talent and the ideation, right, that the young generation has is remarkable, right? It's so exciting. It's so energizing to be in that space. Like I said earlier, a couple of questions ago, the railroads are in place in India, but it would be presumptuous of us to say that the problem has been solved. We're just at the beginning of the journey to solve those issues. And it takes a village, right? It takes banks, it takes fintechs, it takes startups. When I step back and look at it conceptually, a couple of things are happening, right? One is people are taking vertical stacks, one of the vertical stacks of a banking layer, and saying, can I go really deep into sort of solving that? So let's take the most obvious sort of culprit in that is consumer credit. So people are trying to solve it. Can I become a quasi NBFC? Can I become an actual NBFC with balance sheet? Can I do a techno-enabled NBFC play? And so the variety of things. That was level 1, 24 months ago. But just staying on that example, today people are saying, okay, I'm just going to solve for consumer installments at point of sale. That is big enough. There's somebody I met the other day who's just using machine learning to solve for early bucket collections and recoveries. And who do you sort of telecall first versus who do you send a legal notice to? And there's a sort of mission algo on that. Credit scoring. Right now, RBI has come out with the account aggregator sort of license. And that's hugely exciting because that opens up the rails for open banking as it's known in the UK, or PSD2 as it's known in Europe. And that then allows you, let's say you have your account with XYZ Bank and I want to lend you money. You authorize me, you give me consent and permission to directly access your bank account and sort of take those details. I mean, think about the enablement that those creates. So long answer to a short question, but the fintech space, we're only getting started. We are in first gear. I think there's enough amount of ideas, whether it's neobanks or whether it's consumer credit, or whether it's insurtech, whether it's installments, whether it's loyalty. And there are sort of 5-year, 10-year, 15-year opportunities in each of those stacks. And as Visa, we partner with many of those businesses because at the end of the day, at heart of hearts, we are a platform business. And we want as many people to come into the platform, provided they're interoperable, they're secure, right? And they're fit for purpose. We'd love people to come on the platform and collaborate with us to figure out what are the next sort of solutions that the market requires.
We're seeing a lot of VC money going into it is neo-banking. What do you have to say about neo-banking?
The neo is kind of no longer new, right? But it's digital banks. I mean, banks had a regulatory arbitrage in terms of licenses. They still do. I think neobanks today are what tech-enabled NBFCs were 24 months ago. They're flavor of the month. Having said which, Capital One in the US started as a neobank, and they're very, very successful sort of card player. I mean, Goldman Sachs is getting into consumer lending with Marcus and stuff. So the traditional players are getting into it as well. But what is a neobank really doing? And UK was the poster child for many of these neobanks, whether it's Monzo, N26, or Starling, or Revolut, or any of these guys. Basically, they're saying, I can create a consumer experience layer better than you, Mr. Bank. And the reason I can do it as a neobank is because I don't have decades of legacy of technology stack. Honestly, that's the only difference. Because banks have to build the 14th layer or 15th layer on top of a 3-decade-old stack, whereas a neobank can start it from ground zero and therefore solve for that consumer experience. But at some point in time, they will have to figure out the compliance issues and they will have to figure out the regulatory challenges. But for now, it's a really, really exciting space.
What are some of the macro trends that you see in the fintech space?
I think firstly, the whole notion of fintech for digital inclusion is getting enormously popular. We spoke about Indonesia a little later, and Gojek is a wonderful partner of Visa, and they're doing a bunch of stuff there. bKash in Bangladesh, another of people we partner with. I mean, bKash is doing more on the mobile financial services space than arguably many of the banks are doing in Bangladesh. They've reached, I think, 35 million customers in a country that has about 180 million people. And they've really taken the notion of mobile, whether it's a feature phone or a smartphone, and the lessons for India to learn, honestly, from a player like bKash and how we can take mobile financial services to the last mile. And I think when you think about Payments Bank version 2.0 in India, I think they will have to figure that out in terms of how do we take the urban to rural place. Microcredit is another big sort of trend that's coming across both, and I don't mean just microcredit in the term of microfinance that you and I know it, but Shraddha wants 3,000 rupees to order on Swiggy but wants to pay later. That sort of trend is sort of increasing as well. Installments as a consumer credit at point of sale, whether it's online or offline. So when you talk about trends, I think the big trend is a platform play. The big trend is solving for consumer experience. And the big trend is verticalization of consumer finance stacks. And then the rest sort of enabling environment, whether it's Vietnam, Indonesia, we've seen what's happening in Bangladesh, I told you. I think Asia is ripe for the next sort of explosion to happen in fintech.
What has been the most exciting thing for you?
I think whether it's me or anybody else in the role, I think the most exciting thing is that we are catering to a growing market, right? By definition, the currency in circulation or the cash that you and I spend will grow by inflation, right? And therefore, the problem that we have to solve for in 2021 is a larger problem than the problem we have in 2020, just because the nature of the beast is like that. So it's exciting to be in a growing market. And it's honestly exciting to be at the fundamental nature of change that is happening. I mean, just take one example of account aggregators, for example. It can foundationally change how business is transacted. The whole notion of permission and consent-based architectures. Of getting the next 200 million people into digitization is tremendously exciting. Where do you get the bandwidth or the scope or the scale of some of these opportunities? Right? So we are blessed to be living in a time when there's so much change happening and there's so much positive intent. You talk about the government, right? And Mr. Modi's government has been very, very clear on the mega trend of digitization and less cash.
Yeah.
You could sort of, you could quibble about the semantics, but if you talk about the mega trend, that mega trend is not going away. And that has a huge amount of tailwind and a huge amount of, I can easily, like I said, see 10, $100 billion companies in this space. And, we are talking about the unicorns of today. You and I will be having this conversation 5 years later and saying, oh my God, we thought it was so little. It's actually 5x that scale.
Could you talk to us about Visa Everywhere initiative? And this is happening in Sambalpur this year. So how is Visa encouraging FinTech or FinTech adoption in smaller towns?
Well, it's not only happening in Sambalpur, it's also happening in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and then Sambalpur. I think it's our way of reaching out to the community. And what we did was we said, hey, these are really 3 big challenges, right? We'd love for the FinTech community to come forward and participate in this challenge and help co-create, right, meaningful customer solutions. And those challenges are, number 1 is digital credentials. How do you sort of onboard? What's the next non-plastic digital credential, right? Instant digital credential issuance. The second is merchant acceptance and onboarding. Because the problem is it's a flywheel. And when the flywheel works, it's absolutely awesome. But it takes starting friction to reduce for the flywheel to sort of pick up, right?
Yeah.
We need more customers to use digital credentials, and we need more places where those credentials can be accepted.
Yeah.
Right? Because unless I can travel out of home without carrying cash in my wallet and say peacefully I can consume the rest of the day, I'm not going to feel confident as a consumer.
Yeah.
So merchant acceptance is the second sort of big pillar that we want to solve for, including onboarding, including KYC, including sort of digital form factors. And number 3 is B2B, actually. We think there's a huge play in the business-to-business space, by which I mean companies procuring stuff and companies paying other people, those sorts of things, not in the B2C space, but in the B2B space. So these are the 3 digital challenges we gave, and it's remarkable. We started a little less than a month ago. We've got 240 applications so far.
Wow.
And the enthusiasm which we've seen, we were in Bangalore a couple of days ago, and there were like 65 odd fintechs who sort of registered. And the people, and we have obviously like every other company, we expose our APIs, and there are 90 odd APIs we expose through what is known as Visa Developer Platform. It's a sandbox where people come experiment and play and figure out stuff, absolutely free. And the people saying, can we have a product with go-to-market MVP ready by March 5th, which is when VI stops? I mean, 3 months' time, and people are ready with the product. It's like fascinating. And we want to do our bit to say, obviously, we love our traditional banks and we have 18,000 of them all over the world. But we want to add to that ecosystem to make it easier, faster for fintechs to onboard with Visa, to use our APIs, and hopefully work with us to co-create and design consumer experiences on digital.
Will you be taking equity in these companies?
Probably. But Visa is not a financial player. We will partner with these companies 100%. If part of those partnerships mean that at some point of time we have to invest, we will do it in order to enable those companies, but not as a sort of financial
investor. Yeah. With so many different players in this space, do you think that we will have a level playing field, or do you think there'll be few players who will own the market, platform players?
Firstly, like I said, when you spoke about unicorns a little later, mark my words, there will be 5x that number or 10x that number in the not so distant future.
Give us some ideas. We'll start unicorns.
Well, actually, one idea which I'm very, very passionate about, which Visa is very passionate about, is the whole notion of women in payments and women in fintech. I think, I hate to say this, but India is lagging on this parameter. We should not be. The amount of women engineering talent in this country is second to none. It's a shame that we are not doing as much as we should. I mean, all of us collectively as an ecosystem. And, we are absolutely determined to lead some of the changes in that front because we have to have more women-led, fintech. But parking that aside, that's an important subject. Coming back to your question of a level playing field, look, there'll be people who lead not because they come to market first, but because they come to market best. I mean, Apple is never the first in sort of launching any of the products, but they do it remarkably well. And I think there will be players. I think you're going to find players. Consumer credit is still not solved.
Yeah.
And just putting an NBFC, tech layer on top of an NBFC is not solving for consumer credit. And financial inclusion is still by no means solved.
Yeah.
I think we've approached financial inclusion, in my humble opinion, the wrong way around. People don't need places to make saving money easier. Aadhaar has certainly made that easier, but people need credit. A vegetable seller needs credit on Friday when she buys vegetables from the wholesale market, needs credit for a 7-day period.
Yeah.
Right? Agriculture needs credit seasonally. Right? Downstream automobile needs credit 3 months of the year. So we really have to solve for consumer credit. That's going to be a big trend. And he who solves for it or she who solves for it will be a winner. I think you're going to find 3 or 4 winners in each of the categories. But the market is too large to say there'll be 1 or 2. There'll be 4, 5, 10 winners in this space, in each of the spaces I identified.
I'm picking on the last thing that you said about women in fintech. Can you just elaborate about this? Because it's a very important topic, and more so, what do you think are the opportunities?
I think firstly, before defining the opportunity, Shraddha, I think you will agree with me that it's a big challenge for us.
Of course.
I think women participation in the urban workforce, we are behind countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. We are behind Pakistan.
Yeah.
We are behind many of the Middle Eastern countries, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
I think we need equal participation in the workforce. And honestly, I'll tell you from Visa's experience, we have our healthy share of ladies in the workforce, and just the diversity of thought and the opportunity to sort of have perspectives which are different. It's as simple as, I don't want to talk elaborately about diversity, nor am I qualified to be the world expert in that, but I can tell you that if 49.9% of consumers are women, we should have 49% of engineers being women who are designing for them. It's commonsensical.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it's participation at the engineering colleges or the IITs, whether it's participation at the management institutes, which is better than what it was when I passed out of management school 29 years ago, but it's certainly not 50%.
Yeah.
Maybe 25, 30%. So I think women in payments is something that Visa is very, very, cognizant of and wants to push. And women in fintech is certainly a subset of that. I'd love to sort of see what we can do to collaborate. And, we need people like you to vocally and firmly spread the message that, number one, let's call a spade a spade. The current situation is not acceptable.
Yeah.
Let's not sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Let's not say there's opportunity for improvement. The current situation, for the amount of talent that we have among women in India today, we are nowhere near where we should be.
Yeah.
Recognizing and awareness is step one, and then we can figure out what to do about it to create a enabling environment.
Today, you are in the best position to actually give access to startups, to all these large banks and to different players. What are some of the interesting things that you've done as Visa for startups in the last few years?
That's a great question. And I think you're absolutely right. Firstly, that being a platform business, we are blessed because we're not, you're starting something in the fintech side tomorrow. I'm not competing with you.
Yeah.
I'm enabling you to take it to market faster, quicker, in a manner that's more scalable and more interoperable, which is great. Great for you, great for me. So earlier, integrations were mainframe to mainframe, data center to data center.
Yeah.
And that's super hard. It's clunky, right? I remember those days when I was on the banking side of the business and we had to launch something, it's okay, the engineers have given us an estimate of 6 months. You're in the winter queue for prioritization. But now in today's day of APIs, right, what we're trying to do is, to give you the analogy, we're trying to make our front door a little wider and a little taller so more people can come in at the same time. And like I said, we have something called Visa Developer Platform where we expose our APIs. And by the way, this is not global. In India alone, for people who are making in India, we expose about 90 APIs today.
Wow.
90 different APIs. And like I said, we have a sandbox where people can come, experiment, fool around, figure out what works. It's all completely gratis. And then, of course, the commercialization and the go-to-market we can figure out as and when we figure it out. But we have to make it easier for people to do business with us, right? And, remember, we're talking a little bit later, we have to balance it out versus the security argument and the consumer narrative, right? Because we can't make haste to sort of repent at leisure, right? We have to strike the appropriate balance between the two. And we're always very, very mindful about that. But I can tell you, I would be really disappointed if at least 10 to 15 new products don't come to market by March, which is when the Everywhere initiative ends. And that's exciting. That's exciting. So are we moving as fast as we should? The answer is we're moving certainly very faster than we were 36 months ago. We have something called a FinTech Fast Track program where we're sort of onboarding these FinTechs. We're making it easier, simpler, quicker. Are we moving at the pace at which the market demands? Probably not. We need to sort of
that means
step on the gas a little bit.
You have a very high benchmark.
Well, the market has a high benchmark, right? We're all servants of the market.
Visa is a large organization. Do you have like a special team to which they reach out to?
We have a dedicated team to which they reach out to. I mean, we have a dedicated sort of, section in our website where people reach out digitally. We also sort of, the Visa Everywhere initiative is one example of saying, hey, one of the things is not that we want to advertise what we're doing, but just saying, hey, here we are. Here's the banner. Please reach out to us. Right? And that sort of gives people a sort of focus and a direction to say, what do we need to do? We also work very closely with the VC community because that sort of, those folks are catalysts, as you probably know. And so it's a combination of things of how we make it easier for people to sort of reach out, but a dedicated team, a dedicated sort of online interface, and sort of working with partners are all three pieces of the puzzle. And I suspect we have to do all three.
And will you provision some kind of capital to invest in these startups?
We haven't. I mean, honestly, like I said, we haven't thought about the capital. I mean, for the right partnership, capital won't be a constraint. But we are a strategic rather than a finance investor. We don't want to sort of multiply our investments. If it takes capital to, well, it need not be capital. Partnership comes in many forms. We have invested in companies in the past. We continue to do so, whether it's in India, whether it's other markets in Asia. We, the various examples of big ticket investments, small investments. But the more important thing is how do we take that player and make the go-to-market easier. So our engineering talent, we have 1,600 people in Bangalore now. It's a world-class facility. And I love the work that some of those folk do there. If we can help do that, of course we will do that. If it takes capital to sort of lubricate the process, we are not close to the idea.
How do you see the banks? Are they very open to also collaborating with startups and experiment?
So look, the short answer is yes. I think banks have fundamentally at board level, at CXO level, realized that if they don't embrace this, they're not at risk of obsolescence because banking will never be obsolete. The current banking infrastructure can be obsolete. Right? So if they have to modernize, if they have to, appeal to the millennial generation, which they have to, I don't think it's a choice anymore. I think it's an imperative. I think it's a board level imperative for them to partner. Different banks have taken different routes to market to partner. And we work with many of them very, very closely. And the existential questions are the same. What should I do it? There's so many choices. Which of the choice do I take? Which road do I go down? How do I partner with this person? How do I make my open door stuff open the door just a little bit while compliance is trying to close it a little bit. So that healthy tension will always be there.
Yeah.
But the short answer is yes.
Today, the place you are in, how do you get there? What has been your journey? If you can take us through your childhood, growing up, and how do you, for all the young people who are watching, how do you get to be where you are?
Yeah, that's like super interesting, right? Because life journeys always make more sense with the wisdom of hindsight. It always looks very neat and orderly, and when you look facing back, facing forward, it's complex, it's messy, it's like one step forward and two steps back. But I think there are two or three. Not that I'm a great role model. I'd love to get better at it, but I think there are two or three common themes, right? One is my mother was a working woman, and she was a teacher and she was a headmistress. She was bringing up two kids, and my dad was in the RBI, but she never stopped working. And she actually did her MA economics after she got married.
You were here in Mumbai?
No, we were all over because my dad was in the RBI. So we were in Bangalore, we were in Hyderabad, we were in Chennai, we were in a bunch of places. Mostly in Bangalore. Mostly I grew up in Bangalore. And one of the things is, why I feel passionately about women in the workforce, etc., because I've seen the positive aspect of a working woman and how it contributes to some of the stuff, whether, she used to make me read the encyclopedia or whatever it was. There was no internet those days, so life was simpler.
Yeah.
So that's a huge influence, right? That's number one. And number two is, I joined in financial services by happen chance. I actually started my career in advertising. My first job lasted all of 6 months after my MBA school because I did a summer project there. They gave me a final offer. I joined. You didn't know better. And then I joined Citibank after that, and I stayed with Citibank for 19 years. Right?
19 years.
Yeah, and I did 6 or 7 different jobs in those years. However, they were Citibank was part of it was a startup those days. It's pretty much invented consumer banking in India. And the thing is, what that taught me is it's okay to stay in a place for a long period of time. You don't have to jump 5 different jobs. You could jump 5 different jobs. All of us get bored, but you don't have to jump 5 different organizations to jump 5 different jobs.
Yeah.
And there's a certain charm and a certain amount of learning you get in longevity.
Yeah.
Right? Not that I'm advocating everybody to retire from the same place that they joined. That's not what I'm saying. But giving the organization a chance and giving yourself a chance to learn is really, really important. The last thing I'd say is, intellectual curiosity. When we hire, we don't care if you're 100% qualified for the job or not, because you can never be 100% qualified for a job. But if you're not curious and not eager to learn, and your learning agility is not up there, then that's a recipe for sort of, mediocrity.
Yeah.
We have to say, what am I going to learn tomorrow that I don't know today? Right? What will I be 365 days down the road that I'm not today? And as long as I stay focused on that, the rest will follow.
What do you do other than work? Do you have any work-life balance?
Well, life intrudes into work and work intrudes into life. So, in today's day and age, there's no such thing as work-life balance. But I spend a lot of time with my daughters. My daughters are grown up now, and thankfully they were both studying in the UK, so they're back home. So I spend a bunch of time with them. I golf when I can, and I read a lot. I do read a lot.
What is the last book that you read?
Well, the last book I read is actually this collection of essays by Bertrand Russell, which is the man writes so well. But I'm an eclectic reader. I'm going to read The Last Lee Child, which is now released, the Jack Reacher book. I'm a big Jack Reacher fan. But it could be anything. And there's so many flights I take. So 2.5 hours gives you an opportunity to finish a book.
Very honored and delighted talking to you, Ram. Thank you so much.
It was lovely speaking with you, Shraddha.
Thank you.